Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, I'm Amy and this channel is home to everything coloured pencil related. Today we're going to be looking at and comparing 7 different white pencils and deciding which is the best. I'm testing them over 3 different paper types to make this a fairer comparison, and we will be testing on the Fabriano Artistico hot pressed watercolour paper 140 extra white, which is my usual weapon, or in this case paper of choice. On this paper we'll see how the whites go down over dark circles, one set blended with just coloured pencils and the other set blended with a solvent. I also have some anthracite pastel matte paper and some Strathmore 400 toned tan. So we'll see if there is any difference in the laydown over the 3 different coloured surfaces. The white pencils which I've chosen to test are the Caran Luminance, the Faber-Castell Polychromos, the Caran Pablo, Prismacolor, Faber-Castell Albrecht Durer, the Derwent Drawing Chinese White 7200, and finally the Faber-Castell Goldfaber. So now we know what we're testing, let's jump straight into it. First up, we're seeing how the whites go down on the Fabriano, and obviously we're not going to see anything of the white's capability on this paper with it blank, so I've made 14 little circles and filled them all with equal layers of dark sepia, mauve and dark indigo to get a nice smooth dark tone which is perfect for testing. 7 of these circles have been left unblended and the other 7 have been blended out using the Finesse blender pen, which is an alcohol based blending solution. So let's start with the unblended circles. The luminance is up first and it doesn't do too bad a job. It's fairly opaque when using a light pressure and it layers up nicely. When using a hard pressure this pencil becomes more opaque, but as it's creamy in consistency the tip does break easily and it does wear a fair amount. If you're a regular here, you guys will know that this is my favourite white to use, and let me tell you, the results from this little experiment have changed my mind. The Polychromos is our next competitor, and many people think that this guy is fairly useless, and I think that's a little bit unfair. Yes, it doesn't really layer when used lightly, but this could be good if you want a sort of colourless blender. When applied with hard pressure, you do get some opaque lines, and they are incredibly fine and precise. You can apply so much pressure to this pencil because it's of that harder quality and it's much harder than the Luminance. I don't think this does too bad a job. It's along the same lines, the pun there, sorry, as the Luminance, which may be a little bit surprising to some of you. I feel really bad for the time that I actually snapped one of these in half now. The Pablo, like the previous 2, doesn't do too much when applied lightly, but with a heavy hand it really jumps off the page, and it's sort of creamy like the Luminance, so the lines aren't quite as precise as the Polychromos. This does give a really vivid white, and immediately you tell it's the best of the bunch so far. Our Prismacolor is next, and I always thought that this was a really opaque white, but it's really not that great. It doesn't stand out too much from the Luminance or the Polychromos, and because it's the softest pencil of the bunch, it crumbles and wears extremely quickly in comparison to the others. There's not too much difference between light and hard pressure either. In fact, if you use a hard pressure you end up with more smudgy lines than crisp, precise ones. It does layer up nicely though, and you can kind of get a nice white base going over the dark. The Albrecht Durer. I used to use this religiously and I don't know why I stopped because the results of this one are fabulous. Light pressure works a treat and so does layering it up. Hard pressure though gives a really opaque coverage, and because it's got that super tough lead, it can take a fair amount of pressure and still get those crisp, clean lines. I did go back over this one at the end and try activating it with some water as it's a watercolour pencil, just to see if it does give this sort of more opaque quality, but it didn't, it just kind of stayed the same. Now we get to a good one. The Derwent is like a godsend of white pencils. Light pressure, hard pressure, layering, it doesn't matter, it works on all of them. This is the brightest, whitest of the lot so far, and it looks so good. This pencil is really creamy and it does break fairly easily when a lot of pressure is applied, but it gives such good lines. Look at that coverage. Finally, we have the Goldfaber, and damn does this pencil do good. Light pressure, it doesn't perform the best, but apply a little bit of pressure and you've got lines to rival those Derwent ones. This pencil produces much cleaner, crisper lines than the Derwent, and that's because it does have a slightly harder lead. This, despite being a wax-based pencil, it doesn't wear too quickly and it actually holds its point fairly well. So first test, I am digging the Derwent and the Goldfaber. The Derwent having a slight edge in that it works better with light pressure over the Goldfaber. Being a Luminance gal and always reaching for that one, this initial test has got me wondering why I'm such a fanatic over that white pencil. So let's move on to the second test on this particular paper and let's see how they perform over a blended dark area. The Luminance performs slightly better over this surface, and that's probably because it has a lot more tooth to cling to as it's been blended. The marks are a lot brighter already. The Luminance, again, much better coverage, and I think it even outperforms the Luminance when used with light pressure and layering up. What do you guys think? The Pablo, oh my gosh, wow, it's so bright, you might even need sunglasses to look at it. It covers so damn well and has such a dramatic difference to the initial test. Just look at those lines when using a hard pressure. It's done an outstanding job, but bravo, that little Pablo. The Prismacolor doesn't do too much better than the previous test. It layers up pretty much the same, but the hard pressure lines are a little bit more opaque. The Albrecht Durer, like the Prisma, doesn't do too much different than the initial testing, but it does go down a lot easier, especially with the lighter pressure in comparison. The Derwent, when using light pressure, does go down a little bit more opaque and it does layer a lot nicer, and you've got that stronger white tone coming through. The lines aren't much different with hard pressure. They're pretty white though, but this time they have a harsh competitor of that Pablo. The Goldfaber pencil is seriously impressing me. Light pressure on this test does an amazing job, nice and opaque and layers well. The hard pressure does pretty much the same as the previous test. I mean, it's hard to beat the job it did in the first round, come on. From this testing, there's 3 outstanding pencils, the Pablo, the Derwent and the Goldfaber. The Pablo just having a slight edge though. When I squint at this sheet, that one's shining through the brightest, so I'm going to go with that as the overall winner of this round. The Derwent and the Goldfaber are clearly ahead of the pack from both tests, however, as they had a good first and second round. Next test, and now we're going to look at how well the whites go down on anthracite pastel matte. Ooh, this isn't a surface I use a lot, but I thought this may be useful to those of you who do use this. It's also fun to see just how different the tones of white are. Now, all the whites do perform exceptionally well on this surface, that's pretty much a given, so I'm just going to relay the sort of layering experience. The Luminance went down pretty nicely. There's not too much resistance from the waxy content and they actually handle pretty well and wear decently. You can vary the pressure really nicely and get soft whites as well as harsh whites. The Polychromos went down much the same and produces almost identical results to the Luminance. It's a little harder to get a softer tone with this, as even light pressure lays down a fair amount of pigment. This pencil does well in getting rid of that grainy look. It layers a little smoother and easier, and you can layer a lot quicker with this pencil. The Pablo goes down similar to the Polychromos. It layers well and it covers the paper decently too. It's a much brighter white than the previous though, and you can get a much nicer gradient than with the Polychromos. The Prismacolor is really difficult to layer on this paper. The pastel matte really acts like a cheese grater or a sandpaper if you like, and it does take a little effort to get this to layer smoothly. I must admit it's not my cup of tea to use these types of pencils on this kind of surface. The white is undeniably bright though, and it is the best so far. So colour over function? Maybe not in my case, but let me know your thoughts. The Albrecht Durer layers decently and it's really nice to use on this surface. It's almost like velvety. You can get a really gorgeous gradient with this pencil, however the white isn't as bright as I had anticipated, which is slightly disappointing. I swatched this twice so I could see the difference when activated with water, and it gives this almost chalky appearance, which I am fascinated with. The Derwent is nice to use on this paper and not nearly as difficult as the Prismacolor. It's a nice bold white, and with little pressure you can lay down some decent tones. Finally, the Goldfaber, and again this pencil performs. It's nice, it's bright, and you can get a good looking gradient and varied white tone with this pencil. It layered down much like the Pablo pencil. It was smooth and consistent with its tone. Overall, I feel like the Derwent is the winner yet again, and man, is this pencil starting to look really good. Let's move on to the last paper test before going in with our last test and an overview and my personal overall winner. This is the Strathmore 400 tone tan paper, and I included this as a test because I know a fair few of my followers actually use this kind of coloured surface, so here goes. The Luminance and Polychromos, like the other tests, there's not much difference in the final outcome. It all comes down to layering, and personally on this paper I prefer the Luminance. I feel like this paper is designed for more of a waxy pencil, and the Luminance went down like butter. The Polychromos, although it did go down well, the Luminance was just that much nicer to use for this test. The Pablo performed along the same kind of lines as well. It's not super bright, but it did layer nicely. It's filled the paper and there's not much grain showing through, which is nice. Light pressure also produces a nice white lay down, so this is a pretty solid pencil to use for this paper. Prismacolor goes down super smooth, but it does leave a lot of graining. The white though is bright and bold, and light pressure actually puts down a lot of pigment too, which can be both a good and a bad thing depending on how you look at it. The Albrecht Durer without activation isn't that impressive, and it would take a few layers to get a nice opaque white compared to the others. This isn't my favourite on this paper. That is, until it's activated and it becomes like a whole different beast once again, and it gives a nice bold white tone. Finally, we have the Derwent and the Goldfaber, which again, they perform well. The Derwent having that slight edge over the Goldfaber in terms of whiteness, and the Goldfaber kind of taking the lead when it comes to layering. They're both creamy smooth on this surface, and the Goldfaber can achieve nice light whites as well as darker intense whites. The Derwent has a little bit of trouble when using light pressure, as it just seems to want to kind of go all out, but it can be tamed with a little bit of patience. There seems to be a little bit of give and take with these last two surfaces, so it depends on whether you want an easy application and a not so bright white, or a more difficult application and a brighter white. Personally, I'd take the former, but that's just my personal preference. Finally, I have one more test, and that is seeing how well the whites perform under a darker tone. So in essence, kind of using these much like an indenting tool. With all of these swatches, I'm using a really hard pressure to indent the paper as much as possible, and then I'm going over with the dark brown pencil so we can see just how much those white lines stand out. First up is Luminance, and I really wish this did a better job than it did. I'm so disappointed by this. In my mind, I built this up as the perfect white pencil, and from these tests, it's looking completely the opposite. One or two white lines stood out, but a majority of them were lost when the dark colour was applied, which is such a shame. Guys, it looks like I'm in the market for a new white pencil. The Polychromos does an alright job. It's a harder oil-based pencil, so applying pressure is a lot easier than with the Luminance, and it does indent the paper a lot more. It's still not great though. The darker tone has left some staining, although a majority of the lines are somewhat white. It's not bad at all, but we can do much better. The Pablo, now this is where it's at. The lines, oh my days, the lines. So bright and clear. Now, this being a waxy pencil, you'd expect not to get such clear defined lines, but this pencil hasn't really indented the paper. It's sort of just left a waxy resist on the surface, which is kind of repelling any other colour from sticking to it. It's not left 100% of the lines clear, but you can see clear defined lines, and that's good enough for me. Oh dear. The Prismacolor is a bit of a disaster zone in this test, and the lines aren't visible whatsoever. This is an even waxier pencil than the Pablo, so it strikes me as odd that it hasn't had the same effect as the Pablo. There are no defined lines anywhere, and this really does look just like a hot mess, so let's not even talk about this one. The Albrecht Durer has similar issues, and this surprised me so much. Being a hard pencil, I would have imagined that it would have indented the paper a treat, but it's almost as disastrous as the Prisma. I did try sharpening this to an ultra fine tip and it worked slightly better, but the tip breaks really easily and it's not that effective. The Pablo is still the clear winner so far. The Derwent has done pretty well in previous tests. Can it do the same here? Well, no, unfortunately. It's done the same as the Prismas, another hot mess that doesn't even bear talking about. So it's a disappointing last round for the Derwent. Our last Goldfaber test produces some nice results. It does a similar job to the Polychromos, with some lines being bold and others not so. I wouldn't mind using this pencil to put down white tones first if it ever came to it. Our last test has seen a fall to our king pencil, the Derwent, and the rise of the Pablo. You can't deny that the Pablo has done an amazing job with this test. So, let's draw some conclusions. Which do I think is the best? Well, that for me is between the Derwent and the Goldfaber. If I had to pick, I'd go with the Goldfaber purely because it layers much better than the Derwent. I personally prefer the feel of a more solid pencil over a creamy one, and the Goldfaber has that edge for me. However, the Derwent does have some amazing capabilities, and based on these tests, I definitely recommend anyone giving it a try. I'm really disappointed by the Luminance. I vouch for it and use it so much that it kind of hurts to see it perform so badly. Now, I'll just insert this here just in case I get any comments down below, but I did conduct this test with the same amount of layers and the same amount of pressures when using the pencils, or as near to the same pressure as I could get. So in my eyes, this is a completely fair test. I haven't been biased in any of the way that I've used my pencils or anything like that. I've used the pencils exactly the same way that I would if I was drawing on a portrait. There isn't any sort of lifting of the pencil in any way to produce better results from one pencil and not so good results from another pencil. It's a completely fair test, just want to put that out there. The Polychromos as well gets a bad rep. It hasn't performed that bad. It's the same as the Luminance pretty much, and I thought the Luminance was like top notch, so yeah, I'm pleased with what the Polychromos has achieved with this test. I'd love to know what you guys currently use as your white pencil, and I'd love to know whether this little test has changed your mind or swayed you to use and try another white. I highly encourage you to give your white pencils a workout and see which one works best for certain things. As you can tell, they have such different results and capabilities, and it's always good to get to grips with your supplies. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up with that button below. It really does help out the channel. If you're new around here, make sure you hit that sub button. I upload new videos every single Friday, and I live stream on Sundays too, which is great if you want to see some live drawing. We would absolutely love to have you join the growing community here. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you next week. Bye!